Well, to discuss this, I'm joined from Washington, D.C. by Bruce Klingner. He was the CIA's Deputy Division Chief for Korea and is now a Senior Research Fellow of Korean and Japanese Affairs at the Heritage Foundation. Also in Washington, D.C. is Jenny Town. She's the Assistant Director of the U.S. Korea Institute at Johns Hopkins University. And in Augusta, in the U.S. state of Georgia, we have retired Professor Han Park. He's the founding director at the Center for the Study of Global Issues. I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers. Bruce, if I could begin with you, what we've seen in Pyeongchang, is it diplomatic brilliance from both sides, I guess, or is it just a bunch of puff that is distracting from the reality?
Well, it's a bit of both. It's certainly a charm offensive by North Korea. They're trying to drive a wedge between the U.S. and South Korea, but both Washington and Seoul are aware of that, so there's been very close coordination between the allies. There's been some speculation that the Trump administration has changed its policy towards the North, more open to dialogue. I think that's a bit of overinterpretation. I think the door's been open, but North Korea has been reluctant to engage in dialogue with the U.S.
Jenny Town, what have you made of the events in Pyeongchang? Are we seeing a shift in momentum when it comes to both North and South Korea and their relationship with each other, and also as we fold in the United States and Japan and others?
I think it's certainly a new opportunity that hasn't been there over the past few months. But I think it's very difficult to see how far this goes once we move from the actual sports diplomacy and symbolic nature of it to something more substantive, because on that substantive agenda are very difficult issues that do require more confidence from the international community, especially the United States, even for South Korea to move forward in those negotiations.
Mm-hmm. Han Park, Professor, are we just gonna see, after all this symbolism and goodwill, everything go back to business as usual, where the US and South Korea and Japan perhaps do their military drills, North Korea fires its rockets and pledges to annihilate all its enemies, and we're back to business as usual after a little bit of good news at the Winter Olympics? Is that how it's going to play out?
I think it will be, we are looking at a potentially major breakthrough in this regard. We have to look at South Korean government change. Very progressive government came in. Moon Jaein used to be staff director for the Romuhian, very progressive, I guess, pro-North, if you will, government. And in North Korea, Kim Jong-un's posture has changed completely from militarization to economic prosperity. So both situations, that North and South Korea, one people, one heritage, one language, and everything else, they're going to approach Kim Jong-un invited South Korean president who accepted the invitation. So unless American objection, which I expect to be, there will be some dramatic development in inter-Korea relations.
Bruce, major breakthrough, according to Professor Park. I'm presuming you disagree.
I would disagree. The Olympics are a bit like going on vacation. There's a lot of feel-good. You pay for things that you might not buy otherwise. But then after a couple weeks, you go back to work and you realize all the responsibilities and the tensions are still there. So, you know, North Korea has said that its Pyeongchang policy is a continuation of a decision in the 1962 by Kim Il-sung to have guns and butter. What we've seen now, what's different, is that Kim Jong-un's willing to do a charm offensive, which his father used to do, and so far Jong-un has not done. But North Korean charm offensive tend to be a bit more offensive than charming.
Yeah. Jenny, I remember growing up in the 1980s in South Africa, they used to say, with regards boycotts, they used to say no normal sport in an abnormal society, and that was used as a reason for keeping South Africa out of the international fold. Is there a feeling that with this charm offensive and Kim Jong-un's sister, there's an element of normalizing the fact that, I guess, people might forget that this is still a totalitarian country with gulags? Has that happened in Pyeongchang?
I don't believe so. I don't think anyone is under the illusion that North Korea is now different. I tend to agree a little bit more with Bruce on this point that, I don't think it was a major breakthrough. I think it was an easy decision. So North Korea wanted to participate in the Olympics. South Korea wanted North Korea to participate in the Olympics. And so those easy issues are done now. And I think the big flashpoints and the big key points to look for now in the very near future is what happens after the Olympics, what happens when there resumption of U.S. ROK military exercises, how does North Korea respond to that? And I think that will be the real test of how much we actually accomplished by having North Korea participate in these Olympics.
Han Park, beyond that symbolism of the two Koreas marching together and folded into one of the teams, I think it was, if I'm correct, the ice hockey team, yes, and under the United Korean flag. So beyond that symbolism, would you agree with the other two that the real hard work actually begins now? Pyeongchang wasn't the hard work begins after Pyeongchang.
I agree with them. The hard work here is the question of complete denuclearization of North Korea. In my view, maybe the other panelists will disagree with me, and that is we waited too long. North Korea is already a de facto nuclear state. How can we denuclearize North Korea? How can you have verification and irreversible kind of denuclearization? North Korea has bombs, so many bombs, I don't know how many, but delivery system tested over and over again. We're still talking about Washington is denuclearization of North Korea. It will not work.
Right. Okay. So, Bruce, would Washington ever be prepared to accept that? It, over the years, has accepted a nuclear China, a nuclear Russia, a nuclear India, a nuclear Pakistan, Israel, you name it. Does it need to change its policy and say, okay, keep your nukes, but now let's find a different way?
No, we'll assess that North Korea is a nuclear state, but we won't accept North Korea as a nuclear state. Advocates of engagement in the beginning would say North Korea was not building a nuclear weapons program, and then it became obvious they were. Then it was that they were building a very expensive bargaining chip. They were building it simply to give it away, and now it tends to shift to, well, we can't get them to do what they promised to do in 8 international agreements, so let's try something with a far fewer requirements. So I think the U.S. and the international community are saying that North Korea has violated previous agreements, that it's in defiance right now of any number of UN resolutions. So the time is for pressure, and really punishment for repeatedly defying the international community.
Right. With this thaw, Jenny, is Moon Jae-in perhaps maybe isolating a big part of his own country and also the Americans and the Japanese by maybe conceding too much to the North so early on?
I think there is a real sense that Moon Jae-in did give too much during the Olympics. The idea that you have a unified team, the idea that you would have a unified hockey team, for instance, at the expense of South Korean athletes. There's real divided opinion in South Korea about how to interpret this message, especially as you get into the younger generations and especially as you get into conservatives versus liberals. So while there is a faction, of society, especially of the older generation and the liberal generation, that really saw that as a very special moment, there are a lot of, especially the young people, who are really not sold on this idea, and the idea that South Korean government paid for the North Korean to attend in such a large number, and really stole a lot of the attention away from what should have been a shining moment for South Korean national pride as the host of the Olympics, and so they are going to expect something in return, and I think there's a lot of pressure on Moon Jae-in now to deliver on that from North Korea, to have some kind of mitigation of responses of U.S. ROK military exercises and some other measures going forward in order to justify the actions that he's taken.
Han Park, does Moon Jae-in now have to actually, does he have to conduct those drills with the U.S. and the Japanese in order to kind of balance what he's just done in the past week?
I think Moon Jae-in, we have to read correctly. This guy has always been, throughout his life, democratic activist and anti-conservative and pro-North Korea. So he's in power. Probably he will try to do something drastically different from early administrations. So we have to realize that South Korea is, fortunately, a democratic state. People rule. People's sentiment on the question of reunification is tremendously emotional and high, as witnessed by the way North Koreans were received in last couple months, couple of weeks. So in this situation, Moon Jae-in will be moved toward reconciliation with North Korea. It may not be approved by Washington or Japan, but it doesn't matter. That otherwise, South Korean people will rebel against the Moon Jae-in government too.
Right.
So we've got to realize that democracy.
Okay, that's an interesting point. That's an interesting point. You're saying he's different from the others. Let me ask you then, Bruce. Everybody's been trying to solve this riddle for decades, and maybe it takes someone like Moon Jae-in to bend over backwards without getting anything in return from the North early on. Maybe it takes another visit from Dennis Rodman or, you know, all the symbolism of the Olympics, and not guys from the Pentagon or guys with a PhD from Georgetown to fix this issue. Maybe this is what it takes with North Korea. Is that possible?
Well, we've been down this path many times. Remember the euphoria following the Sydney Olympics when they, again, walked in with behind a unification flag. That time there was a secret payment demanded by the North, which the South paid. There was a demand that the South Koreans not outnumber the North Korean teams. They had 350 South Korean athletes sitting out in the parking lot. They couldn't march in. And then we've had any number of other cultural and sporting events. We've had the 2000 and 2007 summits, you know, and it didn't lead to a change in North Korean behavior. So Moon Jae-in, the administration has already committed that the military exercises are simply postponed. They're not canceled. Senior Korean officials told me that in Seoul 2 weeks ago. So, and really the military situation has not changed. The North Korean threat has not changed. So, you know, we've had a few nice photo ops with the Olympics. We've had certainly a, you know, very important trip by Kim's sister, but she didn't, you know, indicate that North Korea was willing to abide by resolutions and international law and U.S. law. So they're really just trying to maintain their same policy, but wean South Korea away from the U.S. Right.
Jenny, what is the possibility of North Korea being willing to abide by any of the UN resolutions or willing to bend in any way?
I tend to agree. I don't think we're going to see a big attitude change from North Korea. I think that, again, this is a potential opportunity to try and change the way that we approach them and the narrative. But, you know, it's too early to tell whether or not it's going to mean anything. And again, if North Korea, for instance, starts to test ballistic missiles in response to the military exercises, all of this goodwill and all of this, you know, opening is really going to close very quickly, and we will end up reverting back to that path. So if this Olympics diplomacy is going to mean anything, it's really going to have to address those issues very quickly as to how do we get North Korea to not respond to the military exercises and to stop testing and to leave a window open for further diplomacy.
Okay, Han Park, final response on this panel, sir. In less than 30 seconds, please tell me why you're still optimistic.
Yeah, I think the change is going to be coming from Washington as well. Right now, Washington's policy is very uncertain. In 1994, we could have made a great stride, but we, the United States, were unable to deliver the terms of agreement, that is crude oil delivery and light water reactor construction. All these things, we couldn't do it. So North Koreans were just as upset as we were. So we have to look at, I'm a scholar, more objectively, fair-mindedly representing, rather than representing a country. I like to see peace workers as mediating. Like South Korea can be a mediator for U.S. North Korea rapprochement.
Okay.
There has to be dialogue. There has to be dialogue. Washington and Pyongyang.
I don't think anybody would disagree with that. There has to be dialogue. Where that ends up, well, we don't know. We'll wait and see. We'll watch it closely. Han Park, Bruce Klingner, and Jenny Town, I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers.